Welcome everyone to our very first meeting for the exploratory meeting towards an EARMA post-award project management thematic group. So I'm delighted to welcome everyone here today. I'm seeing a lot of numbers come in through the meeting room. So what I would like to ask everyone to kind of get a sense of who's in the room and a sense of the community that's here, to put your name of your institution or the country that you're dialing in from, just so we can kind of see that coming up on the chat and kind of get familiar with who's joining. So just to say thank you to EARMA as well for hosting us here today and supporting us through this. So we're in setting up our special interest thematic group. So as I said, we want to kind of form a community. So very much interested in active participation. So please do join in the conversations and the breakout sessions later, and actively participate in this kind of new group that we're trying to form here today. So just a bit of housekeeping. Mics off unless you're speaking or invited to speak. Obviously in the breakout rooms, please have your mics on as well. The recordings will happen during the presentations and there'll be no recording during the discussion. So please feel free to go kind of more deeper into the conversations as you're not being recorded. And then the Q&A session, or the Q&A button, please put in your questions throughout the session. We'd also ask you to put in kind of any ideas or kind of topics that you'd like to talk about as well in the Q&A. And myself and my colleagues will call on you to read out your questions at different times during the session. So just to start, we're going to have an overview of Europe's PM squared project management methodologies by José Luis Ferreira, followed by Richard Twohig and José Santos, to PM or not to PM. How does research PM compare to traditional project management? So we're all very interested in the difference between, I think that's what brought this group here today, is the difference between traditional project management and research focused project management. We all are aware that the different challenges that are faced with both. And then we're going to have a facilitated discussion and breakout session. So Doireann Wallace is going to introduce us through that, and we'll have a wrap up and closing remarks as well. So just to kind of give you the meeting topic for today is project management methodologies for research programs. So this is, I suppose, the key part of it is this is specifically for us, specifically for people interested in research and project management. And again, our invited speaker is from Project Management PM Squared Alliance, José Luis Ferreira, who will talk to us and give us an overview later. So to meet the team, so how does this come about? So the post-award management group is myself. I'm Emma Leahy. I'm the Director of Research Development and Innovation at the Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Dún Laoghaire in Ireland, with my colleague Richard Twohig, who is the Senior Project Manager at Crowd also in Ireland, and José Santos, who is the Research Support Officer and Assistant Researcher at Polytechnic Institute of Braga in Portugal, and Doireann Wallace, who is a Senior Interdisciplinary Research Funding Specialist at Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. So how did we come about? So originally the group formed in Trinity College, where a group of like-minded specialists who were in project management and across the institute who were interested in European research projects, how they work and what makes them kind of go from the life cycle post-award to project end. So we brought together a group of 15 plus individuals who we met, networked, and shared best practice kind of activities and what we were working on. And from that, it developed into a survey of information of research or like-minded professionals across Europe. And from that, myself and Richard presented at EARMA last year, where we met the delightful José and formed this special interest group with the support of EARMA. And Doireann Wallace joined us as well to support in the network and bringing this all together here today. So who are we? We're a form of individuals involved in supporting research and innovation projects. We focus on research performing organizations. We cover active project lifecycle from award to post-project. This is a very important part of who and what we are. We're open to EARMA members with an active role and interest in post-award project management. So anyone who has an interest in project management. So why we have formed, project management in research can be a lonely place. So we're looking to form a community of people, let's say, in this area. So we're looking for like-minded professionals who are seeking peer-to-peer support and finding out ways of sharing opinions and expertise and leverage each other's experiences. So kind of get the shortcuts, finding out ways of doing things the best, most efficient way possible, consideration involving and emerging issues and operational research management, and to serve as an educational and professional resource, support networking the platform within EARMA. So we really want to be seen and heard at different kind of areas across Europe as well, in different platforms. And to have representation, as I said, at EARMA events, it'd be fantastic to see more post-award project management and post-award activities at EARMA as well. So the benefits, as I said, it's a community, we learn from each other. So the more we put in, the more active participation, the more we'll get out of it. So it's a form of professionals in development, a forum for professional development specific to research innovation environments. So again, as I said, this is key. There's very few of us. We're kind of a rare species across Europe. People don't really know what we do. They try and put us into the traditional project management box. So this is just a way of us to come together and to share our knowledge. As I said, validation through knowledge exchange. And this again is to identify opportunities to further develop and share best practices. So please do share any kind of concerns or information or challenges that you have around this through the chat and in the discussion sessions today. So the format. So the plan for today was what we've done before in our Trinity-based group as well, is that we arrange project management discussion. So we choose a specific topic. Then we combine it with volunteers within the group, as well as external speakers and experts. So that's why we have José here today. We're delighted to have him. And then we have a reflection and discussion session. So this is where we learn from each other the most. This is kind of what we see as the best practice and engaging further. So through the steering group, who I mentioned earlier, we plan and oversee these activities, the online discussion forums, the virtual community, and we will have ad hoc training events, and we encourage again people to inform us if there's any events that they would like to put forward for this training. But most importantly for us, and this is kind of something that we're very interested in, is an annual pulse survey of the project management activities going on. So we will be sharing that a survey at the end of this session as well, and encourage you all to participate in it. And it will be an annual piece that we'll be looking to analyse. But also we'll be celebrating the International Project Management Day on the 1st of November. So again, we'll be looking for any ideas for supports on that as well. So what do we want to achieve at the end of this? So the results, so an active EARMA online platform for discussion and information sharing, summary of documents, possibly a white paper following best practice, input to developing EARMA mentorship program, and also input in developing post-award tracks for the EARMA conference, which we have this year, but we'd like to develop it further. And obviously the PM Pulse survey data results that we'll be sharing within the group as well. As you all hopefully know, that EARMA is taking place this May, between the 4th and 6th of May. There will be a dedicated post-award session that myself and my colleagues will be presenting. So it's at 1:30. And we are on discussion table 4, and we'll be talking about managing projects and managing uncertainty, the complex role of the post-award project management. So I'd also encourage you to attend the other sessions, so the Mary Skłodowski Curie COFA Management Group, and also the Diamonds in Your Sofa, which is a title that I'm very interested in finding out more about as well. So they've done well on that to gain the interest. So at this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Doireann Wallace, to share a Menti. So I'd encourage everyone here to go to www.menti.com and put in the code 87782933. And the question that we really want to see answered here is, which of the following approaches do you use when managing research and development projects? So we all manage it in different ways and different tools and mechanisms. So we're just trying to get a sense of what the type of tools that you use today. So I'll pass over to my colleague, Doireann, to see. So as you can see, there's a lot of people using the non-traditional methods. So other standard methods, my own method, which we can talk about in the breakout areas. It'd be fantastic to hear more about those methods that people are doing. And then none. So how do you survive without using any? So this could be people in other areas and not directly in project management, but are engaging with project managers potentially. So yeah, my own method, there is 21 my own methods. So we've a lot of work to do, guys, to figure out what is the best practice within that. So at this point, they're still coming in. But at this point, I would like to invite our colleague José Luis Ferreira to share his, they're still coming, 25, to share his presentation on an overview of PM² project management and methodology.
Well, let me just, because I have not that much time to talk about PM Square methodologies, so I will go straight forward. I'm representing PM Square Alliance, which I will present briefly in this presentation. And how is this going to happen? Well, I'm going to make a few slides on very relevant images of the methodology. Okay, there's a guide, you can read it. I even will tell you where you can pick it up, but I will go just for the main things, and then we'll discuss whatever you might need if you are interested in this methodology. Well, I will talk about the house of PM Square. I will show it very briefly. The PM Square governance model, the PM Square artifact, mindset, the agile way of doing PM Square, and talk about little tailoring, because as Emma said, research projects tend to have its own approach. And we saw on the Menti that no one follows, well, not few follow a traditional or standard approach. I will also present PM Square Alliance, but if I don't get there, no problem. It's just for things to stay and you have more information. And then we'll go to questions. Okay, PM Square is a project management methodology developed and supported inside and by the European Commission. This is why it is relevant for me to be here. Of course, there will be people talking about PMI or not PMI, so there are other approaches and standards. Unfortunately, no one follows Sprint 2, which would be relevant to make a full discussion on the most common. And the definition that was behind, this is not mine, it's from the European Commission. The purpose of PM Square is to enable project teams to manage projects in an effective and efficient manner for the purpose of delivering solutions and benefits to their organization and stakeholders. This comes from Open PM Square, is the first approach outside the European Commission when they delivered, as I should say, the PM Square from inside where it was developed to the community. Community is now, the PM Square is now available in these websites for you to download and to interact with people around the world, not only in Europe, discussing about PM Square. It all started with Open PM Square initiative, but now we have a methodology guide in lots and lots of languages, so you can use, download, and try and learn. Okay, let's go straight forward. PM Square is based on project management best practices. It was built inside European Commission, and they realized that with multitudes of projects and programs going on, they would need a common approach, a common language for project management. And because the best practices were already there, and they came from Prince 2, from Scrum, from PMI, from whatever, they said, this is what we use. So this is the best way to do it. So let's build a guide. And they built the PM Square methodology guide. And PM Square methodology guide bases the methodology on 4 pillars: a governance model, a life cycle, processes, and artifacts. Artifacts are probably one of the best things you can have when you start doing a project management task, because they give you most of the things you need to make the documentation of the project management task and job. To put this together, they built the PM Square mindsets. That's why I will talk about them. And the methodology was always built with the sense of we need to have control. So we need to have a normal planning task. And we also have to have agility. Times are for agile things and not for pretty planned ahead things. So control and agility is the basis for effective delivery of solutions and benefits. Let's go a little bit further in each of the things. What is the life cycle? There's an initiating phase where you create the idea of the project, and then in a moment in time, you decide you are ready for planning. In this moment, you develop what is normally known as the project charter. You have a business case, you have an idea, and you decide it's time to see if we really can go ahead. Then you start planning. And when you have a plan, and the plan is somehow difficult to do, and you know it, especially in research, because there's so much uncertainty that come to a point and say, now we have the conditions to start executing. And once again, you go and say, now we are ready for execution. When executing, of course, you try to apply your plan, but if you are agile enough, you will not apply to the plan, but you just approach iteratively the plan. And somehow you will come to a concluding phase and you just look at the work that has been done and see lessons learned, post-project recommendations, and all things like that. So a 4-phased methodology. We have monitoring and control. It's not a phase. It's something that has to be present all the time. PM Square also defines the roles and responsibilities and provides for free a set of artifacts. I can say there are 33 artifacts, from project charter to checklists, to quality management plan, to communications, whatever you need to do project management. Now, here is the way we normally present PM Square. There's monitoring and control around the whole project, but we have an initiating, planning, executing, and closing. And we come to realize that there are different roles in different parts of the cycle. A project owner is the guy that initiates. Normally we call it sponsor in other approaches. It's the person that wants the project to be built, to be defined. There's the project initiation request. We define scope when we define a project manager. And if we have a project charter, we are ready for planning. With this project charter, we give authority to the project manager to start planning. So we elaborate the scope and we assign a project control core team. And with this project core team, we define a project handbook and the project work plan. The project handbook includes and aggregates everything you need to manage, and the project work plan is the tasks, the normal plan of work, the work plan. Then we are ready for execution. And if we are, we deliver what has to be done to the project core team. Because in this phase, the project manager, all it has to do, that's quite a big work, is manage scope and coordinate everything and assure that deliverables are done. Once this is done, we are ready for closing, and we capture lessons learned to accept the project if the stakeholders say it's okay. Okay, and then we do a project end report. Very briefly, because I don't have much time. There's also a project management governance body. So because PM Square realizes that the project is not a superhero-based task, it's always said there is a project manager, but he's not alone. He has a solution provider that defends him against or works on behalf of him at a higher level of decision against or with at the same level of decision of the project owner. Remember, most of the projects in the European institutions are outsourced. So there's someone that comes. So it's the solution provider, therefore the terminology, but the project management comes from the team that delivers the project. Project owner and solution provider all are at the directing layer, but inside the team, there is a business manager. A project has to have a project side and a business side. These roles are very, very relevant. You cannot decide on the business side of the solution or the deliverables or whatever. So you have your core team, business manager has the business implementation group, so user and business representatives that come inside your team. All together, they create the project steering committee. So the 4 roles are there. If you need more, you bring them, either when you need it or on a permanent basis. And there's an appropriate governance body up there, maybe a consortium, maybe a CEO, maybe, I don't know, higher level of decision, at the strategic level, at the portfolio level, at the program level, no matter. There's a project support team, optional if you require it. And if you are agile, then you decompose or divide your team inside, within agile project core team, which means that you have a team coordinator, a project owner, an agile team, and an architecture owner to build this aggregation together. Why? Well, once again, because agile projects inside an organization, such as most of them, and especially in the European Union, always occurs alongside other projects. You cannot decide that you are Agile and everyone is not Agile. So Agile occurs inside the same framework. And they have to have a team coordinator, unlike other approaches to Agile, because you need a single current of authority, okay? I will not read this, of course, but you have a RAFKey table, responsible, accountable, consulted, supported, informed for everything you need to do and every document you have to do for every one of the roles. And you have accountability, you have responsibility for every one of these. So you need to understand as a project manager, for instance, what are your responsibilities? How can you rely on others to help you build the project? The names are here. The matrix is there, and most of these things are either activities or artifacts that need to be fulfilled. For instance, the project end report is an artifact, but the project coordination is a task, okay? Now, the artifacts. If you look at these, you will say, wow, these are all the things that, that a project needs in terms of documentation. Well, yes, you have to have a project initiation request, so an idea. Can be an email, can be a call for, can be whatever. Then you do a business case, you decide that you go for the project. And if you do it, you have a project charter. And then you go up to the project end report. What the PM Square methodology give you is 6 management plans that are consistent in every type of project. And then you decide what do you need in your project for your deliverables. And then you do the work plan. It depends on what you are doing, but the requirements management plan is done every single time the same way. The communications management plan can be done every single time the same way. Of course, you should tailor it for the needs of the project, but it's given for free. And from the outsourcing, from the project work plan, from the stakeholder matrix, and this, as I said, comprises the project handbook. Then you do the logs, change log, risk log, issue log, decision log, and then you have checklists. These are fundamental for you to go for the next phase, ready for planning, ready for closing, whatever, and also for assuring that you are looking at everything you need to do in order to be a good, if I can say, project manager, which means that if you do project management in a different way, you just have to decide that these checklists need to be tailored to your solution. These types of reports or meetings need to be tailored. The things that you don't do, if you don't do outsourcing, you just cut it out because it's not needed. So keep it lean, but eliminate waste. This is the approach. Control it, but be agile enough. So here is the PM Square phases, activities, artifacts for every single phase. Once again, I'm not going to read this, of course, but it's for you to keep. Now, if you want to be a project manager and apply the right framework, you need to have the right mindset. And the right mindset has been defined for the infrequent asked questions. Do we know what we are doing? I've seen so many projects where people don't know what they are doing. Do we know why we are doing? Is there a purpose on that? Do we know the objectives? Do you know the benefits? It's benefit oriented, not just deliverable oriented, the methodology. Do we know who is doing what at any cost or risk? No. Planning is under the right restrictions of cost, right restrictions of risk. It is important. Is this a task for me? Is this a task for us? Do we really are back-to-back defending the project? Okay, so these are the mindsets that are required, and they are here. And I will not once again read them all, but one of them says, we apply PM Square best practices to manage their projects, and we remain mindful that PM methodologies are there to serve the project and not the other way around. The rest is just commitment, compromise, sharing, and everything alike, okay? Agile also exists. There is a guide. It came out last year. And in fact, what you do is execution is divided from daily cycles, iterations, and releases, okay? But once again, it's been inside the PM Square. So you apply Agile management practices, but inside a framework where you use PM square as the basis. So to finalize, tailoring is something that you should, and this is written in the guide, changing specific parts of the methodology should be done. And we should adapt the methodology to their specific needs and cultures. So when using PM square, it's your mandatory task to look at PM square and decide what you need to do for your project. And this is what you need if you want to do research projects, which are, of course, as you said, very different from other more deterministic projects. But the guidelines are understand the purpose, don't just customize, balance control gain against effort required, and respect the integrity of the model, but get away from what's outside. Why PM Square Alliance? Because unfortunately, and we'll go very fast, the certifications that today exist at the European level only exist for those that work inside European projects. This is one of the most relevant reasons for we to come out of the European Commission. So if you want to have a certification and you don't work at the European Commission, you can only do it with PM Square Alliance. So very fast, some resources, and I will stop because the time has come for me to an end for questions. The rest of the slides are for you to keep. I don't know if I was too fast, but I have time for questions. I was controlling. Please.
It was very quick, Jose, but it was very good. Lots of discussion starters, I think, which is what we're looking for. Yeah. I have a question. There's a couple of comments, but I would ask you, so this was developed in the commission for the commission. Is it used by every department? Is it part of the commission up to this? Where do we see it happening?
Not every department, but it's been tailored. It started at Digit, and then it came out to, well, European Institute, Investment Bank, Research, Human Resources Directorate. It's been applied all over. I have not the list of things. That's one of the things I would like to share, but I decided not to put here because I would be reading things. There are lots and lots of things happening today. Erasmus Plus there's already a chair for PM Square, and there's an Erasmus Plus to bring the PM Square to the universities. Once again, by the commission, but involving Spanish, Italian, and Greek, I think, universities. So this is happening. A public administration outside is being used. PM Square is being used for all over the world. And one of the things that I know, because I've been reached for by someone, is that in Erasmus Plus, some projects at least use PM Square as the basics. Even if it's not written down, they have to be compliant with the methodology. Okay.
Yep. And then we had a comment there from Esther Phillips, which I think is really good. She's taken a course on PM Squared. But the issue is with us is when is it applied, and does it need a professional PM Squared person applying it right from the beginning, from the business case? Because if we come in and try and adopt it later on, we're potentially faced with issues. I think that's the point.
So the purpose is
so
it's most effective when you already use during the I would have a presentation on how to use it while doing the proposal and while executing the project. And there are, of course, approaches. I cannot do it in such a short time. But there is, and there is a partner for PM Square Alliance, which is, I'm sorry to make publicity, European Academy, which does the courses for training for using PM Square as the methodology for EU-funded projects. So, yep. And even the writing proposals, so the whole thing.
Great, thanks. And Jose's going to stick around, so there'll be more time for questions later. I've switched to my screen, I think.
Yeah, please.
Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm taking over, and the next section is on trying to answer this question as to whether, as project managers in our industry, we should study or train in some kind of formal methodology, and if it's worth it. And we're focusing on PMI because I am PMP certified, and so is José Santos, who's doing the second part of this presentation. So I do get asked this a lot, and I normally say, yes, it is worth doing, but you should be aware of a few things first. So I'm going to come at it from a kind of practice and experience point of view. José Santos is part-time academic as well, so he's going to finish with a bit more theory. So I took my PMP exam in 2010, which meant I did my training in it in 2007. So you have to build a bit of a portfolio first before you can take the exam, which meant I studied the PMBOK 4th edition. That's the Project Management Body of Knowledge, which is the book that you learn and then you take the exam on. And so when I did it, it looked like this. So it's 46 processes under 9 knowledge areas, and it was very formal and quite rigid. And the idea was that you learn these processes and you examined on these processes and then you apply them and your projects run smoothly from start to finish. So where did these come from? So a lot of the processes came from, first of all, from the military. So the US Navy developed the PE, Program Evaluation and Review Technique, which was the first kind of book of project management tools. So the example I put there is like the D-Day landings, where you have to build a floating harbor very quickly, and there's a critical objective. Money is not really a problem because you just need to get there and do it as efficiently as fast as possible. So that's the military side. And then they brought in tools from the chemical and process industry. So DuPont had the critical path analysis. They'd invented that technique, and that got incorporated in with PERT, and then we ended up with project management methodologies. So the characteristics of the process industry, the refinery industry, is that there was a lot of money around and a very clear link between cost and time. So this is an oil rig in the Caspian Sea. BP would rent this from a drilling company for $200,000 a day. So if you're out there doing a project and you overrun by 6 hours, you know how much that costs exactly. And then more recent years, the kind of agile paradigm where we have lots of small tasks in a project, where a project can be broken down into post-it notes that can be moved around on a board or on an online web platform. And that would be used for product development and be used for software development. And those kind of tools have worked their way into PMI. So I had a bit of experience in the top right and then in product development. I've never been in the military, but then I came into academia. So my perspectives on the difference between the PMBOK world and our framework projects. And I'm going to go around the triple constraint of project management. So in framework projects, we have one budget, which is agreed with the sponsor, and our target is to draw down on it as much as possible. In the PMBOK, there's normally more than one budget. There's the one that the sponsor has agreed to pay us in a contract, and then we have a project budget that I own as a project manager. And I have some target to realize either a profit or minimize a cost overrun or target savings between those two figures. In the schedule, it's similar in that in our projects, we have a single schedule that's fixed and it's based on the funding. So when the money runs out, the time runs out, and then we extend that if the money allows. In the PMBOK, it's much more of a planning tool, scheduling. So it's a target that is based on the scope, and then depending on how well or how badly you're doing on the project, that schedule can go quicker or overrun. And then scope is the interesting one, because in the PMBOK, you'd spend a lot of time refining your scope down in planning until you have a specification. And then that turns into a work breakdown structure that defines the whole of the scope. And your task as a project manager is to deliver that scope and only that scope. So concepts like scope creep and gold plating come into it. And then if you don't achieve the scope, normally there's some kind of financial penalty. In the framework projects, we have this kind of vision and ambition that's there in the proposal. We don't spend a lot of time reassessing that in planning. And then we try and do whatever we can during the time and while we have budget to the end of the project. So scope creep doesn't really come from our sponsors. Like, you don't get a project officer asking you to do more than you said you'd do. It may come from our partners or from our coordinators. And then if we don't achieve the scope, as long as we've done the right thing and we tried as hard as we can, because this ambition's there, we'll still get paid. We may suffer a little bit in reputation, but really that can be managed. So that's all talking about the project. I could talk and we'll talk a lot more about the organizational environment, but we're going to do that at EARMA. And universities are quite different places to public administration and commercial organizations in the way that we structure projects and the way that we run them. But like I say, that's our discussion table topic at EARMA in Oslo. So I think if we understand these differences, the methodologies, PM squared, PMBOK, whatever you want to learn, can still be applied because the tools are still relevant, but they do have to be tailored and the approach has to change. So this is on a blog post that I read and adapted, and a lot of the project management literature is kind of informal and exists out there on the internet, but there's some really good stuff if you go hunting. So this was about the difference between hard projects and soft projects is how they called it. So a hard project is one where there's a clear outcome and there's an internal focus to the project. So you start off with a very detailed scope and a detailed budget, lots of lines on your Gantt chart, and you can do critical path analysis on them. Then when you go into the project, you're in this kind of cycle where you have a spec that you could compare to, and that means you can do earned value analysis, which is one of the basic project management tools. And then useful things that you can do, you can manage a change and you can control risk in a project. When you get to the end of the project, you do this kind of audit versus a scope statement versus what you started with. If you go and do a project management training course on the PMBOK, you probably learn this stuff. Say you do a 4-day course, you'll learn this for 3 days because this stuff is conceptually can be understood, you can teach it, and then you can be examined on it. Our projects, though, are much more like what they called soft projects, so a fuzzy outcome and more of an external focus. So we spend a lot more time in the initiation, whether we planned it or not, ramping up activity and refining our plans. And stakeholder analysis is really the critical thing. So mapping stakeholders at the beginning, who is affected by the project and who depends on the project. Then when you're in the project cycle of running it, you don't have a spec to compare to, but you can consult with stakeholders as to whether you're going in the right direction. Teamwork is very important, communication very important outwards, and then rather than controlling change, you're managing uncertainty and risk. Then when you get to the end of the project, again, you don't have this audit versus a scope. You have a focus on perception. So you're checking whether people feel like that they've succeeded within the project, and then you're going back to your stakeholder list, basically. There's a lot more you can learn out of this process and apply to your next project. So you're trying to extract as much value out of the project as you can. So if you do a project management course, generally they'll leave this stuff to the end because it's kind of advanced project management, and they'll give you an introduction to it, and then they'll go and say you have to go and put this into practice and learn it on the job because it's quite hard to teach. You have to experience it. I thought this was really interesting when I was reading it because I was running a Marie Curie co-fund project. And again, there's a discussion table at EARMA on those because they're interesting projects. And when you come to the interim review of a co-fund, the REA, who's the body that run co-funds in the commission, they come in and they don't really look at how you've done against your spec in the grant agreement. What they do is they get all the fellows into a room and they ask them if they're happy. And the fellows are the people that you're funding their research. And if they all say, yeah, we're having a great time, then you pass the review. And if they say, oh, well, we were promised some things and then they didn't come through quite as we expected, then the commission will dig into it a bit more and look for ways to improve. So they're applying this. They're looking at the stakeholders who are meant to benefit out of the project and seeing if they perceive the project as a success. What's really interesting about that, again, is that the co-fund is not really a soft project. It's not a research program. You're setting up a program of recruitment and you're delivering a program of research. So you do have a spec and a grant agreement that is quite detailed and you should be able to follow. But this soft project management approach works really well. And that's the secret, is that this approach works more often than not. Because if there's any kind of doubt in the project, then surely you're better off focusing on satisfying your stakeholders and perceptions of success rather than trying to achieve something that you're not entirely certain on. So where does that leave us with the PMBOK? Well, if you look at the most recent version of the PMBOK, which was released last year, they've got rid of all those 46 processes and they've made it a lot broader and a lot more open. And some of this matches the mindsets that José was just talking about there. So they have performance domains and principles. You can see stakeholders is there at the top, uncertainties in there, complexity, adaptability, stewardship, just being a good person when you're managing projects. So it's a bit of a land grab. So they've said, oh, look, PM squared, Agile, soft projects, they're actually all part of PMI now, and we can cover them all, which is good for us because I think we have a home. the challenge with it is it's still difficult to teach. And I think if you go and do a PMBOK course, you'll probably still end up learning all those hard project management skills, because value, measurement, delivery, they're all still in here, and those can be taught and they can be examined, and they'll leave this stuff to the end and they'll say, go out and experience it and learn it on the job. So then tailoring is the one that's in there. And I think that's going to be the theme of today. It's going to be really important. And I'm going to hand over to José there, who is going to talk about his tailoring process.
Okay, thank you, Richard, and thank you, José Luis. So I'll share my screen now. Okay, can you please confirm you can see it? Yes?
Yep.
Okay, just okay then. So thank you, Richard. So following on Richard's presentation, myself, Carolina, and Enrique, we tried to develop a project management framework specific to research and innovation projects and applied it to a case study. As we don't have much time, I will present this very briefly, just to give you an overview of what is possible to do also in practice. So basically, we started by trying to figure out what makes research and innovation projects different from any other project. A lot about this has already been said by the previous speakers. So we did this using a systematic literature review, and we concluded that these are the 4 areas that really distinguish research and innovation projects from all other projects. So its origin, the human factor, the context, and the uncertainty. Just to give you a few examples. In terms of its origin, as it was already mentioned, most of our research and innovation projects are externally funded, as sponsored by, in particular, by the European Commission, by other public funders. In terms of the human factor, as you know very well for sure, that usually in research innovation projects there are, let's call it, issues due to the fact that in many cases the PI, the principal investigator, is also the project manager. So that's usually it's an issue, and that's just an example of a human factor. In terms of context, research innovation projects are also quite different from from all other projects, as usually we have to follow, and you have all these projects are framed in public science policies. So there is a different context. And also in terms of uncertainty, these projects are quite different from all the other projects. Usually there is a higher risk, and also usually, and related with the uncertainty and the risk, creativity plays a key role. So we then studied the main tried to study the main advantages and disadvantages of common project management approaches, such as PMBOK, which was just described by Richard, but also Prince2, Agile, and also some other, let's say, approaches, not formal methodologies, but approaches such as the logical framework. So I'm not going to read the slide. We will also make the slides available. But basically, what we tried to do was to use the best that each project management approach can offer to each specific research and innovation project. So, having done this, we try to find what is common among these approaches. So PMBOK, Prince2, Agile, and the logical framework. And we concluded that all of them, some better than others, but they all have these key, let's call it, principles. So they tend to, or they try to facilitate the clarity of project scope and goals. They are all, of course, based on standards, but adaptable to each context. They are scalable and flexible. Again, some are more than others. But another thing they all have in common is that they model the project workflow. They provide tools, techniques, and templates. They also provide a project board or a similar role that's common to every project management approach. They ensure, or they try to ensure, adequate risk management, and they also try to facilitate the organizational maturity and organizational learning. So, based on all of this information that we got from the literature, we concluded that any project management approach to research and innovation projects should take into account both the specificities of research and innovation projects, namely their origin, uncertainty, the human factor, and their context, and common characteristics of formal project management methodologies, the 8 principles that I have just described. So, having defined this framework, then we try to apply it to a case study. So we applied it to a large-scale national project called Valor Natural. And so how did we apply this framework to the case study? I will just show you 2 slides very briefly, and then afterwards we can discuss the details, or you can contact me if you want more information, or if you have any questions, we can also discuss it during the breakout room sessions. So basically, in terms of the key characteristics of research and innovation projects, as I already mentioned, this is a large-scale industry-driven multi-stakeholder project sponsored by the European Commission structural funds. And this origin really also influenced the way we put in practice the project management approach. In terms of the context, this was set at the project charter based, of course, on the research proposal submitted to the national authorities, and that was approved. But the context was always managed at the project management board and at the advisory board levels, so involving all the key stakeholders. In terms of the human factor, and I think this is quite interesting, and also trying to avoid the problem that the common problem that I mentioned before about the scientific coordinator usually also taking the role of project manager. So in this particular project, the project leader is an industrialist. So he comes from a company which is leading the project. The scientific coordinator is a leading scientist. So the scientist that led the scientific aspects of the project proposal. And the project manager, in this case, actually it's me, so it's a certified project management professional. So as you can see, we tried to separate what is the scientific role, scientific coordination, and the project management function. And I must say that it worked quite well. Also, the stakeholders were involved at the advisory board level, and this is also key, as we could also see in PM² methodology, and as explained also by Richard. So, and finally, in terms of the uncertainty that characterizes research innovation projects, we use the risk register and to compile and to register this information. And the risk itself is managed at the project management board and also at the advisory board level. So again, trying to involve all the key stakeholders in these main roles, main functions. Now, in terms of 8 principles or 8 pillars, how were these applied in this specific project? So, in order to ensure the clarity of the project scope and goals, we used the project charter that, again, as I mentioned before, was based in the project proposal submitted for funding, but in a more concise and objective manner. So the methodology, the approach that we use is based on standards, in this case in PMBOK. So we used some tools, some techniques that are part of the PMBOK, or at least of the previous version of PMBOK. So the methodology that we use is also scalable and adaptable. So basically, we try to keep formal procedures to a minimum, and this was really, really important and really, really valued by the research team. So this, I think, it's really a key issue. The project workflow model was detailed in the procedures manual, along with the tools, techniques, and templates. And again, I think this is also a good point. So it's a very good practice. We have a procedures manual that describes everything that researchers need to do. So basically, when they want to know how to initiate some sort of project management procedures, such as procurement or human resources management, then they consult the procedures manual and they call me afterwards. But they have the procedures manual that they can consult. So there is a project management board set up. As I mentioned, we used a risk register. And in terms of organizational maturity and learning, all the meetings and lessons learned are documented for future use, either in the context of this specific project and or in the context of future projects. So basically, in a nutshell, and in terms of conclusions, from the literature survey and also the practical implementation of this framework that we developed, we can conclude that there is really no perfect project management approach. You must always adapt to each the project management approach to its organizational context and project context. And I mean, this was also mentioned by José Luis and Richard. But we also concluded that there are some basic principles that can facilitate the project management of research and innovation initiatives. This could be the PM squared principles, this could be the PMBOK areas, or this could be the framework that we developed. But there are only some basic principles that you can use as a guideline, but that you have to adapt to each organizational context and project context. And finally, and I think this is a message that also came up from the previous speakers, you have to keep it simple. Because if you don't keep it simple, no one will use it, and it will actually work just the other way around. It will be negative for the project, basically. So this is what I had to, in a nutshell, this is what I had to show you, to tell you about our experience. If you have any questions, please just ask, and I will be happy to reply if I can. I think there are some questions here in the chat, but there is. Okay,
José, we have a couple of minutes, so I think Richard has posted a question asking where do you document lessons learned for future use, and how do you make sure they're not lost? Okay,
sorry, could you please repeat it? I wasn't listening well.
Sure. So Richard, I'll ask the question for Richard, but Richard asked, where do you document lessons learned for future use, and how do you make sure that the lessons learned during one project are not lost?
That's a good question. Basically, we use the reports, okay, the project reports, okay. But we have actually, and that's why I think it's a good question, because we have two let's say two versions of the reports. So we have the very exhaustive and complete reports that we have to deliver to our funding agency, okay? And then we have internal reports where we go straight to the important points, and these are stored at the organizational level, and then other colleagues managing projects can consult those documents, okay? And that's how the information moves from one project to the other. But again, you know, here the context is very specific. So we always also have to have some more complete and reports, sorry, that we need to deliver to the funding agency. That's how it goes.
Great, thanks. And there's another question, maybe either of you could address, Richard, from your experience, or José, from Giovanna, who is asking, should I get a PMI certification? Or what would you advise people asking this? You know,
that was the subject of the talk, right?
Given the flexibility of your methods and your development of a new framework, is it worth getting certified, or is this
my personal view is if you are supporting projects, then it's worth getting certified, because you will learn useful tools. What we're trying to get across is that for our particular research type of projects, you're going to have to do a lot of tailoring. So if you go down the route of training and learning about these methodologies, don't be put off at the first couple of days when you're going to learn a lot of things that might not be too relevant to you, because there's a whole load more that you can learn after it through experience and through getting involved in this kind of exercise that will take you through certification, and then it will be useful to you.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if I may just, José, sorry. I think it's important to get certified, but to be honest, from my own experience, and I'm certified since 2010, it is not crucial that it is PMI or it is Prince 2, or even I dare to say if it is PM squared. But it's important to get a certification that has already some implementation in our own context. But then what is really important, to be honest, is what you do with what you have learned. Okay, so that was just a key message I would like to convey.
Thanks.
If I can add my comments, of course you should try to you should be, or at least aim to be, certified. Where if you go to PMBOK or PMI, you will need at least 3 years of practice before you get certified. So you can try other approaches. You should learn. As Richard was saying, of course you will need to do lots of tailoring, lots of learn by mistake, lots of everything. But if you are driving a truck or a motorcycle or a car and you don't have a driving license, you will not, well, destroy everything at mandatorily, but you should learn. So you should learn the basics of project management. Go to PMBOK and read it. It's quite big, okay? But there's everything you need to know. Otherwise, you can start with Scrum. It's just 5 pages, but it's not enough. So try. I will say PM Square is, because I'm defending PM Square here, is easier to learn as a full methodology. PMBOK is not a methodology, okay? And they say it. We are not a methodology. You pick the knowledge here, you pick the tools, the techniques, the principles, or everything, and you build the methodology. That's what I wrote for you, José, because you did your methodology. You can, well, use. There are other and lots of approaches for project management. If you need, but you need to know scope, time, schedule, cost, whatever. You need to know the names of the tools. You cannot be a project manager and not knowing what is earned value management.
Thank you very much. I think
and
that's
then you don't use it.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's quite clear there's obviously a lot to learn from taking training, and there's also a lot to learn on the job, and the balance between the two is really what everybody's maybe striving for, and hopefully there's great opportunities to learn together about what's working for people, and as we develop this group. So thank you very much for all of those really exciting presentations.